The winter wind howled across the frozen prairie like a wounded beast, carrying with it the scent of snow and death. And rancher Asher Xander knew with grim certainty that someone was out there dying in the white hell that stretched beyond his fence line. He stood on the porch of his ranch house just outside Holbrook, Arizona territory, squinting against the ice crystals that bit at his weathered face. The year was 1883, and this was the worst blizzard he had witnessed in all his 32 years. Most folks thought Arizona was nothing but scorching desert and cactus, but up here in the high country, winter could kill you just as dead as any rattlesnake or outlaw's bullet. Something dark moved against the white landscape, barely visible through the driving snow. Asher grabbed his heavy coat and forced his way down the porch steps, his boots crunching through the knee-deep drifts. The cold burned his lungs with each breath, but he pressed forward, following that dark shape that seemed to be crawling more than walking. As he drew closer, his heart hammered against his ribs. It was a woman, her skirts frozen stiff, her bare hands clawing at the snow as she tried to drag herself forward. Ice caked her dark hair and her lips had turned an awful shade of blue. "Madam!" Asher shouted over the wind, dropping to his knees beside her. "Madam, can you hear me?" Her eyes fluttered open, brown as creek water, glazed with the fog of approaching death. She tried to speak, but no words came out. Without hesitation, Asher scooped her into his arms. She weighed almost nothing, and he could feel the violent shivering that racked her thin frame. He turned and fought his way back to the house, each step a battle against the wind that seemed determined to claim its victim. Inside, blessed warmth greeted them. Asher kicked the door shut and carried the woman to the fireplace, laying her on the thick bearskin rug before the flames. Her clothes were soaked through, ice melting into puddles on the floor. He knew he had to get her out of those wet things or she would die right here in his home. "Forgive me," he muttered, though she seemed beyond hearing. He worked quickly, his movements efficient but respectful, removing the sodden dress and undergarments, replacing them with his own flannel shirt and wool socks. He wrapped her in every blanket he owned and held a tin cup of warm broth to her lips. At first, she could barely swallow, but gradually, drop by drop, the liquid found its way down her throat. Color began to return to her face, though she remained unconscious. Asher kept vigil through the night, stoking the fire, checking her pulse, watching the steady rise and fall of her chest beneath the blankets. Dawn brought a lessening of the storm, and with it, the woman finally opened her eyes. She stared at him with confusion and fear, pulling the blankets tight around herself. "You are safe," Asher said gently, keeping his distance. "I found you in the snow. You were near frozen. I am Asher Xander. This is my ranch." The woman's lips trembled and tears began to stream down her cheeks. "I thought I was going to die out there," she whispered, her voice hoarse. "I prayed for someone to find me, and then you appeared like an angel through the snow." "No angel, just a rancher," Asher replied. "What is your name? What were you doing out in that storm?" "Grace Keller," she said, closing her eyes as fresh tears came. "I was trying to reach Holbrook. My husband and I were traveling through when our wagon broke an axle about 10 miles back. Thomas, my husband, he went for help 2 days ago. He never came back. I waited as long as I could, but the food ran out and it was so cold. I thought if I could just reach the town." Asher felt a knot form in his stomach. 2 days in this weather meant only one thing. "I am sorry, Mrs. Keller. Once the storm breaks completely, I will ride out and search for him." Grace nodded, but her expression told him she already knew the truth. "We have been married only 8 months. We were heading to California to start fresh. Thomas had dreams of finding gold, making a fortune." She laughed bitterly. "Now I have nothing. No husband, no wagon, no money, no dreams." "You have your life," Asher said quietly. "That is something." The storm kept them housebound for 3 more days. During that time, Asher learned Grace's story. She was 24, the daughter of a shopkeeper from Missouri. She had married Thomas Keller after a brief courtship, drawn by his enthusiasm and grand plans. They had sold everything to fund this journey west, betting their entire future on a dream that now lay dead in the snow. Grace, for her part, learned that Asher had been running this ranch alone for 5 years, ever since his parents passed from fever. He raised cattle and horses, sold them to the army and passing wagon trains. He was good at his work, patient with animals, honest in his dealings. But he was lonely. She could see it in the way he savored their conversations, in how he lingered over meals just to have someone to talk with. When the weather finally cleared, Asher rode out with his best tracking skills and a heavy heart. He found Thomas Keller 3 miles from where Grace said the wagon had been, frozen solid, curled beneath a rocky overhang where he had sought shelter. The man's face was peaceful, at least. Asher said a prayer and marked the spot, knowing he would need to come back with proper digging tools once the ground thawed. He found the wagon, too, half buried in snow, the broken axle just as Grace had described. Her belongings were still inside, though many had been damaged by the cold and moisture. He loaded what he could salvage onto his packhorse and made the long trek home. Grace stood on the porch waiting, wrapped in a shawl Asher had given her. One look at his face told her everything. She did not cry this time, just nodded and turned back inside. When he followed, he found her sitting at the rough-hewn table, her hands folded in front of her. "I brought your things from the wagon," Asher said, setting 2 small trunks on the floor. "I marked where Thomas is. Come spring, we can give him a proper burial in the Hallbrook Cemetery if you wish." "Thank you," Grace whispered. "You have been so kind. I do not know how I will ever repay you." "There is no debt," Asher replied firmly. "Any decent person would have done the same." Grace looked up at him with those brown eyes that seemed to hold oceans of sadness. "What will I do now? I have no money for a hotel, no way to earn passage anywhere. Everything Thomas and I had is gone." "You will stay here," Asher heard himself say. The words came out before he had fully thought them through, but once spoken, he knew they were right. "I have plenty of room and the winter is far from over. When spring comes, we will figure out what comes next. For now, you need time to heal and grieve." Grace shook her head. "I cannot impose on you like that. What would people say? A widow living alone with a bachelor. Let them say what they want," Asher replied. "The nearest neighbor is 6 miles away and I do not much care for gossip. You need help and I am offering it freely. Please, allow me to do this." The gratitude that flooded Grace's face made Asher's chest tighten in a way he had not felt in years. She was beautiful, he realized, even with grief written in every line of her face. But more than that, she was strong. Not many people could have survived what she had endured. As winter deepened, they fell into an easy rhythm. Grace proved herself capable and hardworking, refusing to be merely a guest. She cooked meals that made Asher groan with pleasure after years of his own mediocre attempts. She mended his clothes, cleaned the house, and even helped tend the animals when the weather allowed. In the evenings, they sat by the fire and talked, really talked about everything and nothing. Grace told him about growing up in Missouri, about her mother who died when she was 12, about learning to run her father's shop and the customers she had known. Asher shared stories of building this ranch with his father, of learning to read the land and the animals, of the loneliness that had slowly wrapped around him like the cold outside. "You never think of marrying?" Grace asked one night as snow pattered against the windows. "Having a family?" Asher poked at the fire, sending sparks dancing up the chimney. I thought about it, but most women want more than this isolated place can offer. They want towns and society and neighbors close enough to visit. I am wedded to this land, I suppose. It is a jealous bride." Grace smiled, a real smile that reached her eyes for the first time since he had found her. "I do not think the land is as demanding as you believe. Perhaps you simply have not met someone willing to share your devotion to it." Their eyes met across the firelight and something passed between them, unspoken but powerful. Asher looked away first, his heart hammering. Grace was a widow, grieving, vulnerable. He had no right to feel what he was beginning to feel. But feelings, he learned, did not care much about rights or propriety. As the weeks passed and winter slowly loosened its grip, Asher found himself watching Grace when she did not know, memorizing the way she tucked her hair behind her ear, the soft humming that accompanied her work, the rare laughter that had begun to return to her voice. Grace, too, was changing. The haunted look gradually faded from her eyes. She began to speak of Thomas with fondness rather than just pain, remembering the good times they had shared while accepting that their story had ended. And she began to notice Asher in ways that made her feel guilty and excited all at once. He was nothing like Thomas, who had been full of wild dreams and reckless enthusiasm. Asher was steady, thoughtful, his strength quiet but unmistakable. His hands were calloused from honest work, his word as solid as the mountains that ringed the valley. When he looked at her, she felt seen in a way she never had before, as if he understood not just her words but the thoughts beneath them. One morning in early March, Grace walked out to the barn to gather eggs and found Asher struggling with a mare who was giving birth to a breech foal. Without hesitation, she rolled up her sleeves and helped, following his terse instructions, getting covered in blood and fluid and not caring a bit. Together they managed to turn the foal and bring it safely into the world, a spindly-legged filly who wobbled to her feet within the hour. They stood side by side, leaning on the stall door, watching the new mother nuzzle her baby. Grace felt Asher's shoulder against hers, warm and solid, and did not pull away. "You did good," Asher said quietly. "Not many people could have kept their head like that." "I had a good teacher," Grace replied, "and I am not afraid of hard work or a little mess." Asher turned to look at her, and Grace met his gaze. The air between them seemed to crackle with unspoken words, with possibilities that both terrified and thrilled her. "Grace," Asher began, then stopped, shaking his head. "Never mind, we should go get cleaned up." But Grace caught his arm as he turned to leave. "What were you going to say?" He looked down at her hand on his arm, then back to her face. "Nothing that should be said, not yet, maybe not ever." "Tell me anyway," Grace whispered. Asher took a deep breath. "I was going to say that I cannot imagine this place without you anymore, that these past months have been the best of my life, even knowing they came from tragedy. That I wake up grateful for that storm because it brought you to me, and then I hate myself for thinking such a thing when it cost you so much." Grace felt tears prick her eyes, but they were not tears of sorrow. "I think about that too. About how Thomas would feel if he knew that I am happy here, that I think of staying, that I—" She trailed off, unable to finish. "That you what?" Asher asked, his voice rough. "That I am falling in love with you," Grace said, the words tumbling out in a rush. "I know it is too soon. I know people would say it is improper, that I have not mourned long enough, but my heart does not seem to care about any of that. It just knows that when I am with you, I feel like I have come home." Asher closed his eyes, and for a terrible moment, Grace thought she had made a dreadful mistake. Then he opened them again, and the emotion blazing there took her breath away. "I love you too," he said simply. "I have been fighting it for weeks, telling myself it was wrong, that you needed time, that I should not burden you with my feelings. But Grace, You are the light that has been missing from this ranch, from my life. If you want to stay, not as a guest but as my wife, as my partner in all things, I would count myself the most blessed man in all of Arizona territory." Grace launched herself into his arms, not caring that they were both filthy from the barn. Asher caught her, holding her tight, burying his face in her hair. They stood like that for a long moment, two lonely souls who had found each other in the most unlikely of circumstances. When they finally pulled apart, both were smiling through tears. "Are you sure?" Grace asked. "People will talk. They will say we rushed, that it is scandalous." "Let them talk," Asher said, cupping her face in his rough hands. "I have spent too many years alone, caring too much what others might think. I know my heart and I know yours. That is enough for me. Is it enough for you?" "More than enough," Grace whispered. And then his lips were on hers, gentle but full of promise, and she knew without a doubt that this was right. They waited until April to marry, both to allow Grace a proper mourning period and to let the roads clear enough for a preacher to reach the ranch. Word spread through the scattered community, and as Grace had predicted, there was talk. Some said it was too soon, that it was indecent for a widow to remarry so quickly. Others whispered that perhaps Grace had been carrying on with Asher even before Thomas died, though there was not a shred of truth to it. Asher's nearest neighbor, a crusty old rancher named Bill Turner, rode over one afternoon to share his opinion. He found Asher mending fence and got right to the point. "Heard you are fixing to marry that widow woman," Bill said, chewing on his tobacco. "That is right," Asher replied evenly, not pausing in his work. "Folks are talking, you know, saying it is not proper, her husband barely cold." Asher straightened and looked Bill in the eye. "Bill, I respect you, so I will say this plainly. I love Grace and she loves me. We have done nothing wrong, nothing to be ashamed of. Life is hard out here and it is short. When you find something good, something real, you hold on to it. That is what I am doing." Bill studied him for a long moment, then spat a stream of tobacco juice into the dirt. "I suppose you are right at that. The missus and I, we were married 3 months after we met, celebrated our 40th anniversary last year. You do not always get a lot of time to make decisions in this life." He stuck out his gnarled hand. "You have my blessing, for what it is worth, and my wife will want to meet this Grace before the wedding. She will bring by some preserves tomorrow." Asher shook his hand, gratitude warming his chest. "Thank you, Bill. That means more than you know." True to his word, Bill returned the next day with his wife Martha, a plump woman with kind eyes and a no-nonsense manner. She took one look at Grace and pulled her into a hug. "You have had a hard time of it, I hear," Martha said. "But Asher is a good man, one of the best. You will be happy with him, I think." Grace returned the hug, touched by the acceptance. "I already am happy, happier than I thought possible after everything that happened." Martha pulled back and studied Grace's face. "You love him." "I can see it clear as day. That is all that matters. Do not let the gossips get to you, dear. Half of them are just jealous they do not have what you have found." The wedding took place on a bright April morning, with wildflowers blooming across the meadow and the last patches of snow melting in the shadows. The preacher came from Hallbrook, along with a dozen curious townspeople who wanted to see this scandalous quick marriage for themselves. Grace wore a simple blue dress she had sewn herself from fabric Asher bought in town. She carried a bouquet of those wild flowers, and her hair was pinned up with a silver comb that had belonged to Asher's mother. When she walked out to stand beside Asher under the cottonwood tree near the house, the whispers died away. Asher looked at her like she was the sun itself, his face radiant with joy and love. Grace felt her own heart swell as she took his hands. Whatever people thought, whatever they said, this was right. She knew it in her bones. Dearly beloved, the preacher began, and Grace barely heard the familiar words. She was lost in Asher's blue eyes, seeing in them their future, their home, their life together. When it came time for vows, Asher's voice was strong and sure. I, Asher Xander, take you, Grace Keller, to be my lawfully wedded wife. I promise to love you, protect you, and cherish you for all the days of my life. I will share with you my joys and my burdens, my successes and my failures. You have brought light to my darkness, and I will spend the rest of my life making sure you never regret choosing to stay with me. Grace's voice shook with emotion as she spoke her own vows. I, Grace Keller, take you, Asher Xander, to be my lawfully wedded husband. You saved my life, and then you gave me a reason to live it. I promise to stand beside you through whatever comes, to build a home and a future here on this land we both love. You have my heart, now and forever. When the preacher pronounced them husband and wife, Asher kissed Grace with such tenderness that even the most cynical observers found themselves wiping away tears. Martha Turner immediately began organizing the modest reception, setting out the food various neighbors had brought and declaring it a proper celebration. As the sun began to set and the guests finally departed, Asher and Grace stood together on their porch, watching the sky turn shades of orange and pink. Grace leaned against her husband, still marveling at that word, and felt a contentment she had never known. Happy? Asher asked, wrapping his arm around her waist. Impossibly so, Grace replied. When you found me in that snow, I truly believed my life was over. I had nothing left, no hope, no future. And then you said, "You have my love," Asher finished, remembering that moment in the barn when they had first confessed their feelings. And you always will, Grace. Always. Their first year of marriage brought its share of challenges. A late spring frost killed some of the calves. A bout of illness swept through the territory, laying them both low for 2 weeks. There were days of back-breaking work and nights too exhausted for anything but sleep. But through it all, they had each other. Grace proved herself an invaluable partner in every sense. She learned to ride well enough to help move cattle, kept meticulous books that showed Asher exactly where his money was going, and could shoot straight enough to bring down a deer for the table. But she also made their house a home, filling it with laughter and warmth and love. Asher, in turn, was patient with Grace's occasional nightmares about the storm, holding her when she woke gasping from dreams of endless cold. He listened when she needed to talk about Thomas, never jealous of the man who had come before him, understanding that Grace's ability to honor that memory only showed the depth of her capacity to love. And he made sure she knew every single day how precious she was to him. In the summer, they made the journey to the Hallbrook Cemetery with Bill and Martha Turner as witnesses. Thomas Keller was laid to rest with a proper headstone that Asher had commissioned. Grace stood before the grave and spoke quietly to the husband she had lost. I hope you have found peace, Thomas. I hope you know that I did love you, that our time together, however brief, mattered. I am going to be all right. Asher takes good care of me and I am happy. I think you would have liked him. I think you would be glad to know I am not alone. She placed a bouquet of wildflowers on the grave, then took Asher's hand and walked away, her step lighter than it had been in months. That chapter was closed now, properly and respectfully. She could move forward without guilt. That fall, Grace discovered she was pregnant. She told Asher one evening after supper, simply handing him the tiny gown she had begun to sew. He stared at it for a long moment, then looked up at her with wonder written across his face. A baby. We are going to have a baby, Grace nodded, laughing at his stunned expression. Come next spring, God willing. Are you happy? Asher stood and pulled her into his arms, holding her as if she were made of spun glass. Happy does not begin to cover it. terrified, overjoyed, amazed, grateful. "Grace, you have given me everything I never knew I needed, and now a child too." "Our child," Grace corrected, placing her hand over her still flat belly. "Our family, Asher, the family we are building together." That winter was milder than the one that had brought them together, but they spent it preparing. Asher built a cradle from oak, carving it with patient care during the long evenings. Grace sewed tiny clothes and blankets, her heart full of anticipation and only a little fear. Martha Turner visited regularly, sharing advice and reassurance from her own experiences raising 6 children. When spring arrived with its explosion of new life, Grace's time came. The labor was long and difficult, with Martha and Asher both attending her. For terrible hours, Asher paced and prayed, holding Grace's hand when the contractions racked her body, terrified he might lose her. But Grace was strong, stronger than even she had known. As dawn broke on a beautiful May morning in 1885, she brought their son into the world with a final, exhausted push. The baby's cry filled the room, and Martha laughed with relief as she cleaned him and placed him in Grace's arms. "A boy," Martha announced. "A fine, healthy boy with a good set of lungs on him." Asher knelt beside the bed, staring at his wife and child with tears streaming down his face. Grace looked exhausted but radiant, her hair plastered to her forehead with sweat, her smile brighter than the sun rising outside. "We have a son," she whispered. "Asher, look at him. He is perfect." The baby had a shock of dark hair and his father's blue eyes. He quieted in his mother's arms, seemingly content now that he was finally here. Asher reached out a tentative finger, and the tiny hand grasped it with surprising strength. "What will you name him?" Martha asked, tidying the room and giving the new family some privacy. Asher and Grace had discussed this over the long winter. "James," Asher said. "James Xander, after my father." "James," Grace repeated, testing the name. "Hello, James. Welcome to your home, little one." The baby seemed to know his mother's voice already, turning toward her with the instinct of the newborn. Grace put him to her breast, and he nursed hungrily while Asher watched, overcome with a love so fierce it hurt. James thrived, growing quickly in the fresh air and sunshine of the ranch. He was a happy baby, more given to laughter than tears, and he adored his father. Asher would carry him out to the barn, talking to him about the horses and cattle as if the infant understood every word. Grace would watch from the house, her heart full to bursting at the sight of her 2 greatest loves. When James was 6 months old, Bill Turner passed away peacefully in his sleep. Martha, lost without her husband of 41 years, decided to move to live with her daughter in Tucson. Before she left, she came to say goodbye to Grace and Asher. "You two were good neighbors," Martha said, holding James one last time. "Bill always said that Asher was like the son we never had, and Grace, you are the daughter of my heart. I am glad we got to know each other, that I got to see your happiness." Grace hugged the older woman tightly. "You were the first person to welcome me, to make me feel like I belonged here. I will never forget that kindness." After Martha left, the ranch felt a little lonelier, but Grace and Asher had each other and James, and that was enough. The years rolled on, marked by the changing seasons and the small triumphs and challenges of ranch life. James took his first steps in the summer of 1886, chasing after the barn cats while his parents laughed. He spoke his first word that fall, "Papa," much to Asher's delight and Grace's mock indignation. In the spring of 1887, Grace discovered she was pregnant again. This pregnancy was easier than the first, and when her time came in December, she delivered a daughter with considerably less drama than James's birth. They named her Anna, and she had her mother's brown eyes and a temperament as serene as a summer morning. James, now 2.5, was fascinated by his baby sister, constantly wanting to help take care of her. Asher had to expand the house to accommodate their growing family, adding 2 more bedrooms and a larger kitchen. The ranch was prospering too, with a reputation for quality horses that brought buyers from as far as Santa Fe. Life settled into a comfortable rhythm. Grace taught James his letters and numbers, and Asher began showing him the basics of ranch work. Anna grew from a peaceful baby into a curious toddler who followed her brother everywhere on chubby legs. The house was always full of noise and laughter now, a far cry from the silent loneliness that had once pervaded it. One evening in the summer of 1889, after the children were asleep, Grace and Asher sat on their porch watching the sunset, as had become their custom. Grace leaned against her husband, feeling the solid strength of him, and thought about how far they had come. "Do you remember the day you found me in the snow?" she asked quietly. "I remember every detail," Asher replied. "The way the wind sounded like a living thing, how small you looked against all that white, the terror I felt that I might be too late." "I was so certain I was going to die," Grace said. "I had given up hope. And then you appeared and everything changed. Sometimes I still cannot believe this is my life, that I get to wake up next to you every morning, that we built all of this together." Asher turned to look at her, his hand coming up to cup her cheek. "Grace Xander, you are the best thing that ever happened to me. That storm took much from you, but it gave me everything." "Is that a terrible thing to say?" Grace shook her head, covering his hand with hers. "No, because I understand. Something beautiful can come from tragedy. Our life together does not erase what I lost, but it shows that there is always hope, always the possibility of new beginnings." "You were so brave that day in the barn," Asher said, his eyes distant with memory. "When you said you had nothing, and I told you that you had my love. I meant it with everything in me, but I had no idea how much more we would build together. 2 beautiful children, a home full of life, a partnership that makes every day better than the last." 3 children, Grace corrected with a smile. Asher's eyes widened. "You are pregnant again. I suspected last month, but I wanted to be sure before I told you. Yes, my love. Come next spring, we will have another little one running around." Asher laughed and pulled her close, kissing her thoroughly. "You are amazing, do you know that? Absolutely amazing." The pregnancy progressed smoothly, and in April of 1890, Grace gave birth to another son. They named him Thomas after Grace's first husband, a gesture that Asher insisted on. He held no jealousy toward the man who had died in the snow, recognizing that Thomas had been part of Grace's journey to him. "He deserves to be remembered," Asher said as they looked down at the sleeping newborn. "Without him, you would never have been traveling through Arizona. In a strange way, he brought you to me. It is only right that his name lives on in our family." Grace loved him even more for that generosity of spirit. Little Thomas was a quieter baby than James had been, more serious even from his earliest days. Anna adored her new brother, wanting to hold him and sing to him constantly. James, now 5, took his role as oldest very seriously, declaring himself the baby's protector. The ranch continued to grow. Asher hired 2 ranch hands to help with the increasing workload, good men who respected the family and worked hard. Grace started a garden that became the envy of every woman in the area, providing vegetables not just for their own table but to sell in Hallbrook. She also began taking in sewing work, more for the pleasure of the craft than the money, creating beautiful garments that became prized throughout the territory. Arizona achieved statehood in 1912, and the Xander family celebrated along with the rest of the territory. By then, James was a strapping young man of 27, running much of the ranch alongside his father. He had married a schoolteacher named Sarah, and they had given Asher and Grace their first grandchild, a little girl named Grace after her grandmother. Anna, now 25, had shocked everyone by declaring she wanted to attend the new teachers' college in Flagstaff. Asher had supported her decision wholeheartedly, proud of his daughter's intelligence and determination. She came home for summers and holidays, full of stories about her studies and the modern world that was emerging. Thomas, at 22, was the quietest of the three children, but also the most talented with horses. He had a gift for training even the most difficult animals, a patience and understanding that seemed almost mystical. He had not yet married, claiming he had not found the right woman, but Grace suspected he was simply in no hurry. One summer evening, as the extended family gathered for supper, Grace looked around the table at the faces she loved. Asher, now 61, had silver in his hair but was still strong and healthy. Her children, grown and finding their own paths. Her granddaughter, giggling as Thomas made faces at her. The house rang with conversation and laughter, with life. After the meal, after the dishes were done and the younger folks had gone off to their own pursuits, Grace and Asher walked out to their favorite spot, a rise that overlooked the ranch. The sun was setting in a blaze of orange and gold, painting the landscape in colors that took the breath away. "Can you believe it has been nearly 30 years?" Grace asked, taking her husband's hand. "Since you found me in that storm." Asher squeezed her hand gently. "Best 30 years of my life, though you are even more beautiful now than you were then, if that is possible." Grace laughed. "You are a terrible liar, but I love you for it. Look at what we have built, Asher, all of this from nothing." "Not from nothing," Asher corrected. "From love. That was all we had in the beginning, and it turned out to be everything we needed." They stood in comfortable silence, watching the sun sink below the horizon. Grace thought about that terrified, frozen woman who had crawled through the snow, certain she was going to die. She thought about the lonely rancher who had ventured out into the storm against all common sense. Two people who should never have met, brought together by chance and tragedy and fate. "I would do it all again," Grace said softly. "Every hardship, every challenge, every moment of pain and fear. I would do it all again to end up right here with you." "As would I," Asher replied, "though I would prefer to skip the parts where you were in danger." Grace smiled and leaned into him. "My hero. You have always been my hero from that very first moment." As darkness fell and stars began to appear in the vast Arizona sky, they made their way back to the house. Inside, James and Sarah were preparing to head home, little Grace already asleep in her father's arms. Anna was at the piano, playing a gentle melody she had learned at school. Thomas sat by the fire, repairing a bridle with his characteristic quiet focus. This was their legacy, Grace thought. Not just the land or the ranch or the success they had achieved, but this family, this love, this proof that even from the darkest moments, something beautiful could grow. The years continued to pass. More grandchildren arrived, filling the ranch with noise and joy. Anna eventually returned home with a husband, a professor from the college who fell in love with both her and the wide open spaces of Arizona. Thomas finally found his match in a widow with 2 young children who needed the gentle patience he had in abundance. He became not just a husband but a father to those children, giving them the kind of love and stability they had been missing. Asher and Grace grew old together, their hair white, their hands gnarled with age and work, but their love as strong as ever. They still walked together each evening when weather permitted, still talked about everything and nothing, still looked at each other with the wonder of those early days. In the spring of 1925, As new life burst forth across the ranch, Asher fell ill. It started as a cough that would not go away, then progressed to a fever that worried Grace deeply. The doctor came from Holbrook, now a proper town with automobiles and electricity, and gave them the news they had both been dreading. Asher's heart was giving out, weakened by a lifetime of hard work and 7 decades of living. How long? Asher asked bluntly, while Grace gripped his hand so tightly it hurt. Weeks, perhaps a month or 2 if you are lucky, the doctor said gently. I am sorry. After the doctor left, Grace and Asher sat together in the bedroom they had shared for 42 years. Grace was crying silently, and Asher reached up to wipe away her tears. Do not cry, my love, he said, his voice weak but still warm. We have had more happiness than most people get in 3 lifetimes. I am not afraid. I am, Grace admitted. I am terrified of losing you, of facing days without you in them. You are my heart, Asher. You have been my heart since the moment you pulled me from that snow. And you are mine, Asher replied. You will never lose me, Grace. I will be in every sunset you watch, every breeze that blows across the ranch, every smile from our grandchildren. This is not an ending, just a changing. Grace climbed into bed beside him, and they held each other as they had done countless times before. Do you have any regrets? She asked. Asher thought for a long moment. Only that I did not find you sooner, that we did not get even more years together. But no real regrets. We built a good life, raised good children, loved each other well. A man cannot ask for more than that. True to the doctor's prediction, Asher lasted about 6 weeks. He spent his final days surrounded by family, each of his children coming to say goodbye, to thank him for the life he had given them. He held each grandchild, imparting what wisdom he could in the time he had left. And every night, Grace lay beside him, telling him stories of their life together, making sure his last memories would be happy ones. On a warm May morning, with Grace's hand in his and the sound of his family moving through the house, Asher Xander took his last breath. His passing was peaceful, his face relaxed into a slight smile. Grace held him for a long time after he was gone, whispering her love and gratitude, saying the goodbye she had hoped would never come. They buried him on the ranch, under the cottonwood tree where they had been married. The entire community turned out for the funeral, a testament to the respect Asher had earned over his lifetime. As they lowered him into the ground, Grace stood straight and dry-eyed, her children flanking her. There would be time for tears later, in the privacy of the empty bedroom, in the quiet moments when his absence hit her like a physical blow. But for now, she wanted to be strong, to honor him the way he had always honored her. In the weeks and months that followed, Grace discovered that grief and gratitude could exist side by side. She missed Asher with an ache that never quite went away, but she was also so very grateful for the years they had shared. James took over running the ranch, and Grace moved into a smaller house on the property that Thomas built for her, wanting her close but understanding she needed her own space. She kept busy, helping with the grandchildren, maintaining her garden, still doing her sewing. But every evening, she walked out to that rise where she and Asher had spent so many sunsets together. She would stand there, feeling the wind on her face, and talk to him about her day, about the family, about how much she loved and missed him. Grace lived for another 7 years after Asher's death. They were good years, filled with the love of her family and the satisfaction of seeing the legacy she and Asher had built continuing to grow. She got to meet great-grandchildren, to see James expand the ranch into one of the most successful in Arizona, to watch Anna publish a book about education in the frontier territories, to witness Thomas's stepchildren grow into fine young adults who called him Pa with genuine affection. In the summer of 1932, Grace died peacefully in her sleep, just shy of her 73rd birthday. Her children found her in her bed, looking peaceful, a faint smile on her lips. On the nightstand beside her was an old photograph of her and Asher on their wedding day, along with a letter addressed to her family. James opened it with shaking hands and read it aloud to his siblings. In it, Grace told them how much she loved them, how proud she was of each of them. She talked about the legacy she and Asher had tried to leave, not just of land and success, but of love and integrity and the courage to build something meaningful even from tragedy. She ended the letter with these words: "I came to Arizona with nothing but the clothes on my back and a heart full of despair. Your father gave me everything: his love, his name, his partnership in building a life worth living. Together we created something beautiful, and that beauty lives on in each of you and in every generation that comes after. Remember that love is the strongest force in this world. It can save you from the coldest winter, build warmth from nothing, and create legacy that outlasts us all. I am going now to be with your father, but I am not sad. I am grateful for every single moment I was given. Take care of each other, love each other, and know that your father and I will always be watching over you with pride." They buried Grace next to Asher under the cottonwood tree, which had grown massive over the decades. At the funeral, James spoke of his parents' love story, how a winter storm had brought them together, and how their love had warmed not just their own lives but the lives of everyone they touched. The ranch continued to thrive through the generations. James's children took it over when he grew old, and their children after that. The Xander name became synonymous with quality and integrity throughout Arizona. And always, there was the story, passed down from grandmother to grandchild, of the lonely rancher who had saved a widow from the ice, and the love that had bloomed between them. The cottonwood tree became a landmark, a place where young couples in the family went to propose, where anniversaries were celebrated, where the family gathered for important moments. It stood as a living monument to Asher and Grace, to the love that had started with nothing but proved to be everything. In the 1980s, one of their great-great-granddaughters, studying history at Arizona State University, wrote her thesis on the settlement of northern Arizona in the late 1800s. In her research, she uncovered records from the terrible blizzard of January 1883, including a brief mention of a man named Thomas Keller who had frozen to death seeking help for his stranded wife. She also found the marriage record for Asher Xander and Grace Keller, dated April 1883. From those bare facts, combined with family stories passed down through 4 generations, she pieced together the full story. She interviewed elderly relatives who remembered the tales their grandparents had told, visited the spot where the original ranch house had stood, and felt the presence of those 2 remarkable people who had started it all. Her thesis won awards and was eventually published as a book titled Love in the High Country: The True Story of Asher and Grace Xander. It became a bestseller, touching hearts around the world with its tale of love, loss, and the courage to begin again. But for the family, the story needed no embellishment. They knew the truth of it in their bones, that love could indeed conquer all, that hope could be found even in the darkest winter, and that sometimes the worst moment of your life could lead directly to the best. The ranch still stands today, though it has changed hands outside the family now. The new owners, aware of its history, have preserved the cottonwood tree and the small cemetery beneath it, where Asher and Grace lie side by side. Visitors sometimes stop by, drawn by the book or by curiosity, and they always comment on the peace of the place, the sense of enduring love that seems to permeate the air. The inscription on the shared headstone is simple: Asher Xander, 1851–1925, and Grace Keller Xander, 1859–1932. You have my love always. And if you visit on a summer evening when the sun is setting and the wind whispers through the cottonwood leaves, you can almost see them there, a rancher and his wife, standing hand in hand, looking out over the land they loved, together for all eternity. Their story lives on, a testament to the enduring power of love, to the strength found in partnership, to the beautiful truth that even when we think we have nothing, love can give us everything. From a frozen wasteland of despair to a legacy of joy spanning generations, Asher and Grace proved that the human heart has an infinite capacity for renewal, for hope, and for creating something lasting and beautiful from even the darkest beginnings. And so the story ends where it began, with two people who found each other against all odds, who built a life from nothing but love, and who left behind a legacy that would warm hearts for generations to come. The lonely rancher who ventured into a deadly storm. The widow who thought her life was over. The love that saved them both and created something that would outlast them by a century and more. This is their story, and it is a true one in all the ways that matter. Not because every detail can be verified by historical record, but because it speaks to a fundamental truth about the human experience, that love is the ultimate survivor, the final victor, the force that makes all the pain and struggle of life worthwhile. Asher and Grace knew this truth, lived it fully, and passed it down to every generation that came after them. And in doing so, they achieved a kind of immortality that no amount of wealth or fame could ever purchase. They became a part of the land they loved, a part of the legacy of the American West, and most importantly, a part of the eternal story of love's triumph over adversity.